The story revolves around a fighter, a man who rarely loses his temper, and when he does, he never backs down. The story starts with an illicit fight in progress. Frankie, a woman in need of a bouncer for her bar, arrives to observe the brawl. Enters our champion. Victor dares the spectators to a duel, promising the spoils of victory to anyone brave enough to accept. Our hero rises to the challenge. The opponent, confident of an easy victory, suddenly gets worried when our hero disrobes. Fearing what he sees, the opponent concedes defeat and departs. The reason for his fear will be revealed later. Our hero triumphs without throwing a punch and collects his winnings. As he approaches his car, a thug who had wagered on the fight stabs him in the abdomen and flees. Frankie finds him and commends him for his performance in the ring. Fighters refuse to engage him once they learn his identity, which is why he initially conceals it. Noticing the knife wound, she calls for an ambulance, but he declines. He sterilizes his wound with alcohol and bandages it with tape. Frankie owns a roadhouse in Florida Keys, which has been plagued by hooligans causing havoc and destruction. The local police are of no help, and no bouncer lasts long. She offers him a weekly salary of $5,000, along with free room to stay, to work as her bouncer. He declines, and Frankie leaves. As he crosses the road, a train forces him to stop. Unaware that he's parked on the tracks, he's taken by surprise when the train approaches. He tries to start his car, but it fails him. The train collides with his car, but he survives by gripping the steering wheel tightly. With his car now roofless, he decides to accept Frankie's offer and heads for Florida. His name is Elwood Dalton, who is a formidable fighter. On his journey, he encounters Charlie, a bookstore owner, who gives him a book to read for free. She inquires about his purpose in town, and he explains that he's there to assist the troubled owner of the Roadhouse bar. Charlie's father provides Dalton with directions to the Roadhouse and refuses payment for the book. Upon arriving at the Roadhouse, Dalton orders a coffee from Laura and meets two other employees, Reef and Billy. Billy recognizes Dalton and expresses his admiration. Dalton enjoys the peaceful atmosphere of the place until a fight breaks out. Billy manages to quell the disturbance and ejects the troublemakers. A gang of rowdies arrive on motorcycles and begin to wreak havoc in the bar. Dalton observes Frankie watching the chaos from above. When one of the rowdies, Dell, harasses Vaters, Dalton intervenes. He asks Billy to step aside and confronts the rowdies. Dalton calmly asks the rowdies to leave, prompting everyone in the bar to gather outside to watch the unfolding drama. He inquires about everyone's insurance and the distance to the nearest hospital. After learning it's 25 minutes away, he swiftly subdues the rowdies and proposes a draw to Dell. When Dell questions the term, one of his men explains it as a situation where neither party wins. When the rowdies refuse to accept the draw, Dalton gives them a few more blows. He then borrows Frankie's car and drives the rowdies to the hospital. At the reception, the nurse asks if the men are his friends, to which he replies that he was the one who beat them. A doctor named Ali thanks Dalton for bringing in new patients and asks if he beats people for fun. Dalton clarifies that he does it for money. Ali notices Dalton's wound and treats it. Reese and Billy, the bar staff, were quite taken with Dalton. Frankie then approaches Dalton, handing him a week's worth of pay as promised. She suggests he take a room at a nearby hotel, but Dalton has his eyes on a beached boat nearby. Frankie informs him that the boat is theirs, but it's not seaworthy. She warns him about a particularly dangerous crocodile in the vicinity, but Dalton decides to clean up the cabin and move in. One night, as Dalton dreams of his past fights, he's awakened by Laura, who brings him food and asks him to consider her as a sister. She shares her experiences with previous bouncers and expresses hope that Dalton's arrival might change things for the better. Dalton's reputation precedes him when he visits the local bookstore, where everyone greets him warmly. Charlie, the bookstore owner, reveals that she's read a book about him by Martin Holly and now knows all about him. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of a fight outside. Charlie bravely confronts the rowdies with a baseball bat, but they mock her. When Dalton steps outside, the rowdies flee at the sight of him. The scene shifts to Brian, the boss of the rowdies, who is upset that his men were beaten by a single man and failed to destroy the bar. Back at the bar, a patron starts a fight over a song. Dalton advises Billy on how to handle the situation, teaching him some fighting skills. Dealing with drunk guys and breaking up fights becomes a daily routine for Dalton. One day, Dr. Ali visits the Roadhouse bar and strikes up a friendly conversation with Dalton. That night, as Dalton heads home, Dell, one of the rowdies, tries to run him over and throws him into the water. Dalton manages to escape and return to his boat, only to find Dell waiting for him with a gun. In the ensuing struggle, Dell ends up in the water and is eaten by a crocodile. The next morning, the police search the water but find no trace of Dell or the crocodile. Later, as Dalton leaves Charlie's bookstore, he's confronted by Jack, another goon, who tries to intimidate him with a gun and orders him to meet his boss. Dalton, unfazed, breaks 2 of Jack's fingers and sends him back to Brian with a message to meet him at the roadhouse. Upon Dalton's return to the roadhouse, Frankie expresses her relief at Dell's demise, admitting that he had been causing her trouble for months. Meanwhile, Jack reports back to Brian, who is frustrated by the turn of events and angrily throws his phone into the water when his father calls. Knox, a notorious pickpocket, rowdy and formidable fighter, who receives a call from Brian's father instructing him to head to Florida immediately. The following day, Ali arrives with a boat, revealing that it belongs to her boyfriend, a police officer. She takes Dalton out to sea, where they relax until Ali begins to probe into Dalton's personal life, prompting him to leave. Dalton decides to depart, explaining to Ali that while she's a wonderful person, he's not the right man for her. Ali acknowledges Dalton's fame and reputation, just as Knox arrives in Florida and heads straight to Brian's hideout. He confronts Brian and his men, revealing that he's been sent by Brian's father. Brian dismisses Knox's offer of help, leading Knox to inquire about Dalton's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Ali drops Dalton back at his boat, where they're approached by 2 policemen who instruct Dalton to accompany them to the police station. The sheriff, who turns out to be Ali's father, attempts to persuade Dalton to leave town. When Dalton refuses, the policemen assault him. Ali intervenes, slapping the sheriff and revealing to Dalton that her father is under Brian's father's influence. She advises Dalton to leave town. Later that night, Brian confronts Dalton at the bar, showing him a video of a fight between Dalton and his friend. Dalton was overcome with rage and killed his opponent in the ring. This deeply depresses him, and he remains silent. And Brian leaves, instructing Knox to do as he pleases. Knox then incites a brawl at the bar, which Dalton observes calmly from a distance. When Knox calls Dalton out, a fight ensues. Knox lands several blows on Dalton, who appears to be taking the hits deliberately and remains unaffected. As Dalton prepares to leave, Ali arrives and calls for police backup. Dalton departs without a word. Dalton returns to his boat, packs his belongings, and prepares to leave. Frankie approaches him, revealing that Brian's father intends to seize the roadhouse and build a resort. Dalton advises her not to sell if she doesn't want to, but asks her to spare his life. Frankie accuses Dalton of running away out of fear, to which Dalton admits his fear is greater than she can imagine. Dalton then heads to the bus stop near Charlie's bookstore, only to find it burnt down. He learns that Charlie and her father have been taken to the hospital. His bus departs without him, leading him to Brian's hideout. There, he encounters Vince, who attempts to attack him with a knife. Dalton retaliates, breaking Vince's neck and causing him to fall into the swimming pool and drown. Dalton explains that he was leaving town to avoid losing his temper, uncertain of the consequences if he did. He then places Vince's body in a truck. Dalton inquired about Brian's whereabouts, and the roadie informed him about a meeting Brian had scheduled for 5 a.m. to arrange funds for his operations. He then thanked Dalton for sparing his life and took the body to his boat, storing it in the ice. The following morning, after the meeting concluded, a policeman heads towards the boat carrying a bag full of money. Dalton stealthily follows him, knocks him unconscious, and hides the bag. He starts the boat and sets it adrift at sea. He places Vince's body on the boat and fires bullets at it with the policeman's gun. The policeman questions Dalton's actions, to which Dalton responds that he doesn't want to get caught and that he was angry the previous night. The policeman threatens to tell everyone that Dalton is the killer. Dalton, picking up a stick, retorts that the policeman will hardly remember the morning's events. He then cracks open the policeman's skull with the stick. He calls 911, reports a corpse on Harvest's side, and mentions a wounded policeman nearby, urging them to hurry, as the policeman might still survive. While Dalton is on his boat, the sheriff comes to meet him. He informs Dalton that Brian has kidnapped his daughter and is demanding a ransom. Dalton claims he doesn't have the money, and the sheriff reveals that the wounded policeman has told him everything. The money is with Dalton, and Brian believes it is with the sheriff because he has sent his man with the money. The sheriff urges Dalton to do whatever he can to save his daughter. Dalton asks where he should bring the money. Dalton then steals Ali's boyfriend's boat and informs her boyfriend that the sheriff has requested the boat. The policeman warns Dalton that if there is even a scratch on his boat, he will ruin Dalton's life. Meanwhile, Knox is heading to Brian's den. He knows how to drive a car but doesn't know how to stop. When he arrives at the den, he finds it empty as everyone has gone to Brian's boat. Dalton also arrives there. Jack and Sam take Dalton to Brian. The sheriff is also present. Brian asks where his money is. Dalton, looking at the sheriff's face, comments that it doesn't seem like his daughter has been kidnapped. The sheriff admits that he has lied to Dalton, meaning Dalton has been betrayed at the time. Brian then reveals that he has indeed kidnapped Allie, leading to a double cross. The sheriff becomes angry and draws his gun, but Sam tells him to sit down. Brian instructs Dalton to bring the money and take Allie. They then notice another boat approaching from behind, with Knox on board. Brian orders his men not to let the madman onto the boat. Dalton pulls the trigger and blows up Allie's boyfriend's boat. The explosion is so powerful that everyone on the boat is injured. Dalton then goes to find Allie. She is locked in the lower cabin and is trying to break the glass to get out. Dalton breaks the door and enters the cabin. The glass also breaks, and water rushes into the boat under high pressure. Allie and Dalton manage to escape the boat. Brian then pulls Allie onto his boat and speeds away. Knox attempts to kill Dalton, but Dalton climbs onto his boat and throws him down. Knox manages to catch the rope tied behind the boat. Brian sees Dalton approaching from behind and turns his boat to kill him. When the boats collide, Dalton jumps and lands on Brian's boat. He then attacks Brian. The boat is moving at high speed and is about to collide with a building. Allie and Dalton jump down just in time. The boat jumps and hits the roof of the roadhouse. Knox also arrives at a bridge built over the water. He stops a car there and hijacks it. Meanwhile, Dalton is searching for Brian. Brian attacks Dalton with a fish-catching gun. Dalton retorts, asking if Brian thinks he is a fish, and then begins to attack Brian. Knox also arrives, and a fierce fight ensues between the two of them. Both are formidable opponents. Dalton grabs Knox's throat tightly and doesn't let go. Knox manages to get a sharp stick stuck in his hand and stabs Dalton in the stomach. Brian also arrives and instructs Knox to finish his work and kill Dalton. Knox kills Brian. He picks up another sharp stick, and as soon as Knox tries to stab Dalton, Dalton snatches the stick from his hand and stabs him with it 10 times. The cracked skull drops. The sheriff then arrives and advises Dalton to leave. He assures Dalton that he will handle everything. Allie also tells him to leave. The next day, the cleaning of the roadhouse begins. Frankie and her companions believe that they will soon restore the place to its former state. Dalton waits for the bus in front of Charlie's bookshop. Charlie arrives and asks if he is leaving forever. Dalton confirms that he is, stating that stories end like this. When Charlie's father goes inside his shop, he finds a large suitcase filled with money. When he comes out to meet Dalton, he sees that the bus has already left. Billy asks Reef where their hero might have gone, but perhaps even the hero himself doesn't know the answer. And with this, the movie concludes. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more amazing recaps.